Welcome again. This is SEPTA Forward Bus Revolution, reinventing SEPTA's bus network. I'm Beverly Harper, president of Portfolio Associates, a member of the Best Bus Network consulting team. The agenda for tonight includes a welcome from SEPTA's Dan Nemiroff. He is the manager of planning programs. After Dan speaks, I'll come back on to talk a little about the agenda, some technology information, and we'll do a few polling questions to test our technology. So, welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Beverly. Hello, everybody, and good evening. My name is Dan Nemiroff, as Beverly said, and I'm the manager of planning programs here at SEPTA, and I am the project manager for SEPTA Forward Bus Revolution, which I do want to note is the first comprehensive bus network redesign in the authority's history. We're excited to have you join us tonight for our first transit talk, which highlights some important aspects of bus service design, which we are thinking about as we consider changes to our network. Bus Revolution is a key initiative of SEPTA Forward, which is our strategic plan, which aims to revamp our services to better connect people across the region. Aside from Bus Revolution, there are a few other projects that I just want to mention here that are important components of this plan. This includes our Wayfinding Master Plan, which you may have read about this week, as well as our Regional Rail Master Plan, which you will definitely be hearing about more in the future. Ultimately, the goal of all these initiatives is to turn SEPTA's suite of services, which have historically been separate, into an interconnected 21st century lifestyle transit network that people throughout the region can use for all kinds of things. To hear more about these projects, I invite you to visit our planning site at planning.septa.org. All of these projects are going to rely on public input and feedback. So visit the site, share information with other people. If you see surveys, take them if you're so inclined, and definitely let us know what you think about our work. And with that, I'm going to hand this back to Bev to officially kick off tonight's presentation.
Okay, thanks, Dan. I want to give you a little information about the agenda for tonight. I'm going to, in a few minutes, start with some polling questions to test our technology. And then you'll hear from Bethany Whitaker, who is a principal with Nelson Nygaard and manager of the bus network redesign. She's going to talk about some trade-offs. Trade-offs are always important, especially when dealing with a legacy system like SEPTA, legacy meaning old. She'll be doing some polling questions during her presentation, and then we'll have a Q&A session. Please put your questions in the Q&A feature. The session tonight is being recorded. Technology is great. Most of the time it works. Sometimes it doesn't. If you run into problems, please put something in the Q&A and we'll try to help you. Your mics are muted. We had about 150 people who signed up for the session tonight, and that's great. You can imagine what it would be like if 150 people, or even half of them, tried to talk at the same time. So the mics are muted. Supporting us this evening, we have two great sign language interpreters, Joy Harris and Jennifer McGowan. And I'd like to remind the speakers to every once in a while give them a little break. We have a wonderful team of IT professionals, TAT Communications, Tom, Sage, and Jessica. And then finally, last but not least, we have Henry Felsman, who is on my staff. He will be reading the questions during the Q&A session, and Bethany primarily will be responding to them with a little help from Dan as needed. So what I'd like to do now is ask three polling questions to make sure that our polling technology is working. So if we will Henry put up the first poll. Okay, yes, I'm an Eagles fan and I'm proud of it. So here's the first question. How will the Eagles fly this season? Will they go to the Super Bowl, the playoffs? No playoffs, but better than the Giants? Yay. It's a young team and we're building for 2022. Boo. So let's see where the audience is tonight. Let's see, I'll give you one more second. Okay, no playoffs, but better than the Giants. Not good enough for me. Let's go to the second test question for our polling. And this relates to the subject matter for tonight. When was the last time you rode a SEPTA bus? Today? Within the last week? Within the last month or so? Before the pandemic? Or not since? Not since. So let's see. Well, SEPTA's going to be happy about this. We're trying to get as many people back on the system as possible. So we had about a third, a little more than a third of the people who rode today. Excellent. And our last test question. Our last test question has to do with a year from now. How often do you anticipate riding a SEPTA bus? Almost every day, frequently, occasionally, rarely, or never? People are pretty quick with this, so let's see. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Frequently. So I know Dan's happy about that. So thank you very much. Again, remember, put your questions during the presentation in the Q&A. We will answer the questions at the end of the sessions. Mics are muted. I will come on toward the end to give a 5-minute warning, and we'll take a couple more questions after that time. So with that, I'd like to turn the program over to Bethany Whitaker from Nelson Nygaard. Welcome,
Excellent.
Bethany.
Thanks, Beverly. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you all for being here. My name is Bethany Whitaker. Some of you may have met me through other conversations or some of our other virtual meetings. I work for a company called Nelson Nygaard, and we specialize in working with transit agencies around the country. We have a lot of experience on working in projects like the bus revolution, working with transit agencies to redesign, reimagine, and reconfigure their bus services. So we're really happy to be here. We're really happy to be working with SEPTA. And tonight, I want to talk a little bit about transit speed and reliability. I'm hoping that by the end of the talk, you'll have a better understanding about why speed and reliability is important and have a sense of what are some of the early ideas that we have about making sure that bus service is faster and more reliable. We also, as Beverly mentioned and Dan mentioned, we have part of the conversation tonight will be us asking you for your opinions about some of the solutions. And then, of course, we'll have some time for Q&A and some conversation. So for the first part of the presentation, I want to talk about what it means when we say transit speed and reliability and make sure that everybody understands why it's important. So the idea of reliability is something that's familiar to us. We use the term a lot, and I think everybody sort of understands what that means. But it's also something I just want to take a minute to talk a little bit about what it means in the context of transit service. So reliability is about consistency and predictability, and it's also about trust. So when we're talking about transit services or using SEPTA buses, it's about trusting that your bus is going to come and knowing approximately how long it's going to take for you to get where you want to go. Speed is a part of the conversation because making service reliable also means that we keep the buses moving on the street. So these are really important goals for a transit service. We know that because we've asked people, and this is what you have told us. We've asked a variety of different groups what their priorities are for improving SEPTA. We've asked it in, this is a word example from a word cloud. We've also asked people in survey questions, and reliability is consistently on the top of the list. So we know, I think we all know that traveling in any big city and certainly in and around Philadelphia is unreliable. Transit agencies like SEPTA know this already, and when they make their transit schedules, they they try to keep that unpredictability in mind. They try to balance on average how long they think it's going to take to complete a trip. And often they get it right, but not always. And I think we all know that there's a lot of reasons why a bus can be late. There may be some more traffic than usual, there may be an accident, or a lot of cases, especially in Philadelphia, there's road work and there's detours. So those are all things that make, slow down the trip and make the bus trip take longer than it might need than you might expect it to. There are also a lot of small things that can get a bus into trouble, like making a left-hand turn or waiting for a group of passengers to board the bus. And all of these things and many more cause delays. For the rider, however, when the bus is late, they end up waiting at the bus stop or they spend longer trying to get to their destination. And this can be frustrating and inconvenient. We also know that when transit is unreliable, and especially when it's unreliable a lot, riders suffer. They may have to plan more time for their trip than they need, and all of that time means that they aren't doing something else that they would prefer to do. So, if a bus is, you have to leave your house 15 minutes early in order to make sure that you aren't late and to make sure you get to work on time. We know that that 15 minutes means time that you could have spent sleeping. It could have meant time sipping your coffee and reading the newspaper or spending time with your friends and family. When bus service is unreliable, it also means that getting to appointments and showing up on time is more difficult, and that can end up costing money. And we also know that when buses are late, it makes people stressful. And then finally, we often know that this unreliability, the costs and the stress and the impact of the unreliable service is paid by low income individuals and families, as well as historically and currently marginalized populations. So people who use the bus the most, they pay this cost the most, and so reliability is often most important for them. So we really see reliability as an equity issue. So, but however, I think the good news is when transit agencies can get it right and make service more reliable, people will spend less time waiting for the bus and more time doing what they really love to do. And they're also more likely to trust and use transit. And this is really important because ultimately the whole bus revolution project is about making SEPTA a better service, attracting more riders, and making it more useful to more people. So before I kind of go into the solutions, I just want to talk a little bit about what speed and reliability looks like in Southeast Pennsylvania. So for starters, SEPTA understands that service reliability is really important. They have a goal that 80% of their bus trips arrive on time. So they've defined on-time performance as there's a little bit of room in that schedule. So if a bus arrives a minute or two early or leaves a minute or two late, that still counts on being on time. And within this window, the goal for the system overall is that 80% of all bus trips are on time. So the data that we looked at, which you can see here on the slide, it shows that about 30 routes, which is only about 25% of the system, meet that standard. So the data that I'm showing here, just as an aside and to be totally upfront, this is before the pandemic. So things have definitely changed, and service reliability is changing with traffic patterns, and in many ways, it's harder to be reliable now than it was before the pandemic. But the important thing is that right now, only a portion of the buses are meeting that standard, and most bus routes are not making that standard. It's also the case that some of SEPTA's most important bus routes, the ones that carry 15,000 or nearly 20,000 riders each day, aren't on time. And many of these bus routes that carry the most riders, they go into Center City, which is where there's the most traffic congestion. So in some ways, it's not surprising, but we really want to take into consideration the impact of this unreliability. Some of these bus routes are only on time about 2/3 of the time. So that means about 65, 70% of the time. And that means a lot of people are waiting around or having to spend a lot more time than they'd like to get somewhere. It also means that a lot of people could be discouraged from taking transit. The data also shows that travel speeds are slow. The map to the left shows the average bus speeds during the afternoon. And it's the afternoon peak hour, which we've defined as 5 p.m. So the red is shows that the bus routes that are traveling at 8 miles an hour or less, and orange is 8 to 10 miles an hour. So you can see quite a bit of orange and red. You can see it throughout the center city, but also Philadelphia, some pockets throughout the system. So travel speeds are slow in the system, and when we look closer into the city of Philadelphia, we see more red and we see more orange, and that's telling us that the buses are moving really slowly. That's especially true for Center City, but also West Philadelphia, North Philadelphia, and South Philadelphia, as well as some of the surrounding areas. So given that the bus speeds are so slow, it does make sense that service reliability is one of the biggest challenges facing SEPTA. And it's also not surprising that riders know this and they're pointing it out to us. So from there, what we're going to do now is I'm going to walk through a handful of ideas and potential solutions that we're taking a look at as part of the bus revolution. At this point, these are just ideas. And as I mentioned, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on them in a few minutes. But for now, what I want to do is explain what the concepts are, how they work, and what some of the advantages and disadvantages are. So for right now, what we have, and these are our strategies. We've got a lot of ideas. We're looking at a lot of things. These are the ideas, and this is our toolkit right now for improving transit service speed and service reliability. I know that some of these have been discussed before, and some of them are much easier to do than others, but I wanted to put the whole toolkit out and talk about them individually before we ask you all to weigh in on them. So they include adding more buses or increasing the frequency of service, straightening out the bus routes, making them a little bit more direct, rebalancing bus stops, building bus bulbs, building bus lanes, and expanding transit priority. So frequency. Frequency, I think most people know, most bus riders know when we talk about frequency, what we're talking about is how often the bus comes. So when we talk about increasing frequency, what we mean is adding more bus service. So the idea is if a bus comes more often, it can make service more reliable and convenient. So for example, if a bus comes every 5 minutes and you just miss one, or the bus is really crowded and you can't get on it, there's another one coming in the next 5 minutes. And so when you think about your total trip, you have a little bit more confidence that you're going to get to where you want to go in the time that you think it's going to take you. And it makes everything a little more predictable. So this can be a good solution for improving service speed and reliability. But of course, we need to be careful. So there are some places where SEPTA could increase frequency to improve reliability, but in other places there are already a lot of buses, and some of those buses are getting bunched up, and they're making the road more congested and making the problem worse rather than better. It's also worth pointing out that adding frequency is very expensive. Bus service operating costs of bus service is high, and so if we add more buses, it is a cost to the agency. And so that is also an important consideration. Another thing that we can do is make the bus routes straighter. So we all know, or anybody who drives knows, and even when you're on a bicycle or even sometimes as a pedestrian, making a left-hand turn is difficult. There can be conflicts with people trying to cross the street, and sometimes it's just slow and difficult to turn a bus onto a narrow street. And we see a lot of that in Center City, where the streets are really narrow, and one car that is not parked properly can slow down the whole bus or can make that turn really difficult to make. It's also the case if we can make the bus routes straight, it also makes them simpler and easier to understand. So this can be a good solution for SEPTA. There's a lot of routes where I think we can make them straighter, and if we can make them straighter, we'll make them faster and more reliable. But in some cases, what this means is that people might need to walk a block or so further to get to the bus. So we have a graphic here, and I just want to point out that, some bus routes will go off the main road to serve a destination. There's like a suitcase here. I'm not sure what that icon's supposed to be, but let's say the bus is serving this destination and then it comes back on the road. So if we eliminate that and you're trying to get to this destination and you get off the bus on the main road, you will have to walk. And so we're sensitive to that, and we understand that that might inconvenience some riders, but this is one of the trade-offs that we're trying to understand and understand, is the trade-off worth it? Is it worth it to walk a little bit further to get to a bus that's going to be faster and will be more reliable? And so speaking of walking, another strategy that we're looking at is balancing or changing the space between bus stops. This is another important strategy that we can do to get SEPTA buses moving faster, because every time the bus stops, it has to slow down and open the doors, get passengers boarded, and it takes at least 30 seconds to stop the bus, and sometimes a lot more than that. So if we can reduce the number of bus stops, we'll get the buses moving faster and service will be more reliable. But just like straightening out the routes, it does mean that some people will need to walk a little bit further to get to their bus routes. For some people, this is a good trade-off and it's one that they're willing to make, but it might not be for all riders. All right, so bus bulbs. So bus bulbs refers to when you extend the sidewalk or the curb to meet the bus. You have a picture of it right here, and you can see this yellow curb comes out to meet the bus, and it sort of extends the sidewalk. In Philadelphia, sometimes the buses stop in the road and riders have to walk into the street to board the bus. This takes time and it can be inconvenient, especially if you have trouble walking or in a wheelchair. So I have a picture of a bus stop in Philadelphia, and you can see there's a lot of congestion and confusion right here as people are waiting to get the bus. This bus driver is trying to put down a ramp, so maybe somebody that has a mobility impairment on the bus is trying to get off and they can't quite get the ramp down. It just shows the complication of trying to get the buses up against the sidewalks. And bus bulbs really help eliminate that strategy, and they also make the bus faster and it's more reliable, and you can do a better job predicting how long it's going to take for people to get on and off the bus. So if we can build bus bulbs, we like the strategy because it makes it easier and safer for riders. It also makes it faster for people to get on the bus. This will save the bus route time, and it makes it easier to predict and, of course, more reliable. So, of course, as always, there are challenges with this strategy. Bus bulbs won't work on every street, especially those really narrow ones that we have. And building them costs money and it takes time. And SEPTA doesn't own the streets or the sidewalks in any of the jurisdictions where it operates. So we'll have to make sure that we partner with some of the cities and the counties and the local governments. And we also need to make sure that other travelers, like cyclists, have space on the road. All right. So the next one, I want to talk a little bit about transit priority. When we talk about transit priority, there's two things that I'm going to talk about tonight. The first one is called, or we're calling traffic signal priority. So this is when the bus has a device that is installed on top of the bus and it talks to the traffic signal, and it tells that traffic signal to wait a second or two so the bus can get through the intersection. So this is designed to keep the buses moving and make sure that sometimes the bus will board with passengers and then it moves out into traffic and then it has to stop at the light. And so if you have the traffic signal priority, it can tell the signal to just hold on for another second or two, let the bus go through, and then the service can be a little bit more predictable and a little bit more reliable. This is the same type of technology that an ambulance might use or a fire truck, but you can have this on the buses and you can still have ambulances and fire trucks that always take the priority over buses. So signal priority is a strategy that can make a small difference in a lot of locations and add up to real-time savings. It's also a strategy that's really popular in cities around the United States. Philadelphia has a little bit of it right now, but it's not widely used. And Philadelphia and many of the jurisdictions in the region have a lot of traffic lights. They have a lot of intersection controls. And so those are some of the things that are slowing down the SEPTA buses. So it's a solution that could have some benefit. But of course, this one also costs money. It requires collaboration and working with city partners and counties, and really for everybody to get together and talk about what they want to prioritize and how they want to keep the vehicles moving. So another transit priority strategy is called queue jump lanes. And this is when the buses get a little bit of a space. I know this picture is a little bit fuzzy, but there's a short lane right here where the bus can pull in, and then there's a signal that when the traffic light turns green, the bus can pull ahead and get ahead of the other vehicles in the intersection. This again is a strategy. It's not going to work in every location, but it can work in some. And when it does work, it can be super helpful, saving a couple of minutes, making the service more reliable, making it more predictable, and making it faster. So the last thing I want to talk about is bus lanes. So bus lanes, as the name suggests, are lanes, traffic lanes or roadway lanes that are only for use by buses. These types of lane means that the bus doesn't get caught up in traffic and it can move more quickly through the streets, and it can be a valuable way to make sure that buses stay on time. It also is one of the, people often complain like, oh, why should I take the bus? It's just sitting in traffic. When you have a bus lane, it can really make a difference and keep vehicles moving. I have a picture here of a bus lane in New York City. So this, I think most of us, when we think of a New York City street, we don't really think it looks like this. I'm not exactly sure where this is. It's a really nice picture to illustrate the benefits of a bus lane. It's a one-way street. So we have a lane for the bus. We have plenty of space for the vehicles. We have parking, and we have bike lanes. Of course, if we're going to do, and also Philadelphia has a few bus lanes already. I think Chestnut has one, and we're looking for a couple more places and segments in the city to put them in. Some of those bus lanes are sometimes there's problems with cars parking in them, or they're not super well marked, but there are a few bus lanes already. And I think one of the things that we're talking about is, do we need more of them? If we need more of them, how can we make sure that we get support for them? Because bus lanes can be super controversial, especially with when traffic's already congested and people who drive are afraid that congestion is going to get worse if they take one travel lane away. But if they're done right and people do start taking the buses more often, bus lanes can mean that more people get where they want to go, and it can reduce congestion and traffic for everybody. So the biggest challenge with bus lanes is that they're controversial with drivers. They take time to build. They can be expensive. They also require collaboration with cities and counties and other partners to make sure that there's support for them and to implement them. So the last thing I want to say is that we're not suggesting that we do all of these things everywhere. We think that some ideas make sense for some places, but we want to make sure that we recommend and use them where they make sense. So for example, if a bus route is carrying 20,000 riders a day, that's a great corridor or a great candidate for doing all of these things: increasing frequency, straightening the route, reducing the bus stops, building bus lanes, and using transit priority. But on other corridors, it might make sense to only do one or two of these things. So I also want to point out, some of you, especially people that are really familiar with transit and think about it a lot, adding up all of these things together, we end up with a service that we sometimes call Bus Rapid Transit or Rapid Bus, or in some ways, it's sort of like the direct bus service that SEPTA already has on Roosevelt Boulevard. But this idea that we do all of them together, we make a service that's fast, frequent, reliable, and really predictable, and it can be one of our priority and premier corridors in the network. So with that, I've talked a lot. So what I want to do now is hear from you, and I'm going to show you some choices and trade-offs, and then I'm going to ask you to vote. So much like you did when Beverly was asking you about the Eagles, I'm going to ask you about some of your choices and preferences for different types of transit service. So I'm going to walk through two of them, and then Henry's going to show us the voting. The first one is, what do you like best? Would you prefer a shorter walk to a slower bus, or a slightly longer walk to a faster bus? So in this first graphic, you see the person here has to walk about 2 minutes to get to the bus, and then this bus is going to stop frequently along the route, and it will take a little bit longer for it to get to its destination. In this scenario, the individual has to walk about 5 minutes to get to a bus stop. The bus is not going to stop nearly as frequently, and this ride will be faster. It will also be a little more reliable. And then the second choice is about bus lanes. And we're asking you, do you think that bus lanes are a good idea? Do you think buses should have their own travel lanes where it makes sense? Or do you think that buses should share the road with other cars and other vehicles? And so with that, I think, Henry, it would be great if you could show the polling and give people a chance to weigh in. Great, thanks. So the first one, as I mentioned, a shorter walk to a slower bus, or a slightly longer walk to a faster bus. So go ahead and weigh in, and we'll take a look and see what the audience thinks. So it looks like buses having their own, you can still vote, but I'm just observing that buses having their own travel lanes is the strong favorite. But of course, we know we have a slightly biased audience. So I think people who call into a transit talk are probably more likely to feel that this is an important strategy. But it is nonetheless good to hear from you about this. And then it looks like most of the voting is done. We had about 54 people voting, and the majority, about 3/4, said that they would prefer or they would be willing to have a slightly longer walk to a faster bus. And there's about 1/4 of the people who would still prefer a shorter walk to a slower bus. So thank you for that. All right, we're going to get back and do 2 more of the trade-off exercises. So I'm going to give a minute for this to go away. All right. And so the next trade-off gives you 2 choices. The first one is a bus that takes an indirect path and slower, but closer to your destination. So this person doesn't have to walk nearly as far, but once they get on the bus, it goes indirectly to their final destination. So it's going to take a little bit longer. The second one, there's a bus, you have to walk a little bit to the bus stop, but once you get there, the bus is straight and direct, and so the time on the bus will be slower, and the ride should be a little more reliable. All right, so that's one trade-off. And then the second one is, and I'm going to spend a second talking about this one because I think this one can be a little bit confusing. So this is a choice between, so these red routes are more frequent service and the green routes are less frequent service. So on the right, you have a network that gives you a lot of options. All of them have the same level of frequency, and they all stop about the same amount. So this individual can walk in about 2 minutes to one of these green routes, but anyways, all the green routes provide more or less the same level of service, but the walk is super close. In this case, the individual has a choice of walking the same 2 minutes to get on a green route, or they could walk longer, about 5 minutes, and get to a red route that's going to be faster, more direct, and stop less often. So with that, Henry, can you bring up the polling again? We'll ask people to choose between these 2 things. Great. So you can see the first one, remember it's a bus that takes an indirect path and is slower but stops more often, or versus a bus that travels more directly and is faster but stops less often. And then the other choice is fewer options with higher frequency or more options with the same level of frequency. All right, perfect. So it looks like we had, and I think about, oh no, we have a few more people voting. So great, let's leave it up. All right, it looks like, thank you. You can go ahead and close it. So it looks like that most people, about 70%, are saying that they would prefer a bus that travels directly and is faster, even if they have to walk a little bit further to get to that bus route. And this compares with a bus that takes an indirect path and is slower, but a little bit closer. And so the other question that we asked, and this one looks like 87% of the people said that they prefer fewer options with higher frequency as compared to more options with the same level of frequency. All right, so I have another question that's very similar to that last one, and this is the last of the trade-offs. So in this question, we have buses serving a larger area with less frequent service. So you can see the buses kind of, and this is supposed to be more of a suburban environment rather than the last one, which you saw the nice grids network of streets. This one is more like the suburban network, and you can see less frequent service. It goes on more streets, but probably these buses are coming every 60 minutes or so. That compares with having buses that serve a smaller area, but the service is more frequent. So these red lines, the bus might be coming every 20 or 30 minutes, but you can see the bus is only staying on the main roads. So if we can bring back up the polling, we'll ask you to vote and weigh in on those 2 choices. And so go ahead and vote again. And I think for some of you, it says here coverage versus ridership or frequency versus coverage. I think for some of you who follow transit and talk about it, this is a trade-off that you're probably very familiar with. So we have about 42, good. I think last time we got in 52 people responding. All right, looks like just about everybody has who wants to answer has answered, have about 50 votes. And it looks like 80% or 78% of the people are saying that they would prefer buses serving a smaller area with more frequent service. And that compares to buses serving a larger area with less frequent service. So thank you very much for answering those questions. That's super helpful for us. These are also similar questions that we're posing. I think many of you may know that SEPTA is, or the Bus Revolution team is doing a series of pop-ups around the region. We're going to be at transit centers and bus stops all across the region. We'll be asking people these same questions. So stop by and say hello. We're going to show you where they are in a minute, but I do want to make sure that just give a plug, because they are going to have some Bus Revolution swag and some stickers and bags and things like that to give out to people. So with that, I think what we'll do now is hear from you. And if you have any questions that you want to ask us, I'm certainly happy to answer them. I think Dan's available to answer some questions as well. But anything about these choices, these concepts of how we can improve transit speed and reliability in the SEPTA service area, would love to hear what you have. Also, if you have any questions about the project or anything else that we're doing, it's also appropriate to ask those. We have a good 10 minutes or so that we can do Q&A.
Okay, Henry is going to ask the questions, and Bethany will be responding. So in just a couple of seconds, and there's Henry.
Hey,
Henry,
thanks,
you got
Bev.
your first question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Bethany. Thank you, everyone, for attending this evening and submitting questions. I encourage you to continue submitting as we do this Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. So I think this is a good first question. It kind of frames where we're at right now with the SEPTA Forward Bus Revolution, allows us to take a step back. But can you explain what the objective and motives are behind this initiative?
Sure. So Dan, I'll go ahead and give a start to that question, but this might be something, a place where you want to weigh in on. So the idea and the motive behind the bus revolution, or the comprehensive bus network redesign, is really that SEPTA has not taken a comprehensive look at its bus service ever, really. And so the Bus Revolution project will take a look at the service, make sure it's matched with where people are traveling now, when they're traveling, where they're traveling, looking and helping cleaning up some of the problems that we just spent the last 20 minutes or so talking about, like, there's some big problems with speed, and there's some problems with reliability. And these are things that the comprehensive look at the system can help uncover and help identify. And then by identifying them, we can come up with solutions and start to solve those, so that we build and strengthen the bus network overall. And I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Dan.
Yeah, I think that just to sort of provide some historic context, Bev called us a legacy system, and she's right. I mean, we are running a bus system that's very similar to legacy streetcar systems from decades ago. But obviously, COVID has become its own, sort of transit destroyer of sorts. But even pre-COVID, we were losing ridership at a pretty steady clip all over the system. And our service was getting slower and less reliable. So it was becoming less effective and less useful for people. So we view this project as a chance to kind of really take a step back and look at our entire system, see what works, because we do have a lot of parts of it that work pretty well, but also identify parts that can be improved, and really focus on creating better access and better mobility throughout the region. So, we do have a process, our annual service plan process, that has allowed us to make small changes incrementally over time, but we've never done anything like this, and we think it's long overdue.
Great. All right, the next one is about speed and reliability. Is reliability only defined as 5 minutes late? What about if a bus shows up 5 minutes earlier than scheduled?
Okay, so it is very typical for transit agency. So I think that there's two concepts here. One is on-time performance, and the other idea is reliability. So when we talk about on-time performance, that means, does the bus arrive at the stop at this time that that's published in the schedule, or that SEPTA has told you that it is expect to be at the bus stop, be at the bus stop at 7 because the bus is going to come at 7. So the transit agencies around the country define speed and reliability typically as, 2 minutes or so early and 3 minutes late. And so the idea is that if you're expecting the bus to be there at 7, you probably need to be there by 6:58, and you should be expected to be on the bus no later than 7:03. So that's on-time performance. And I don't know, Dan, you might be able to tell, I don't know exactly what SEPTA's definition for on-time performance is, but it's probably right around there. And on-time performance is related to reliability and this idea that you can trust that the bus is going to come, but reliability also speaks to the whole trip. So if a bus service is reliable, it will also be on time. But the bus could be on time at your stop, but still not be reliable over the entire journey.
It's 2 minutes early to 5 minutes late for SEPTA, but
Okay.
I think the rest of the answer. I think on-time performance is sort of a transit agency metric, but reliability, I think, is a slightly more holistic way of looking at, as Bethany said, the whole trip. And reliability is also something which isn't just, one moment on one day at one time. It's really like if you use the same route all the time, and the reliability jumps all over the place, it's obviously not as useful a service for you. So reliability it's sort of harder to quantify, and all of these different factors that we're talking about, speed, on-time performance, things like that play into it.
All right, we have a few questions about how is accessibility, mobility being weighed when dealing with stop spacing, and a lot of people are specifying senior populations and how looking at people with more limited, accessibility issues, and how the stop spacing will be considered senior populations.
Right. So accessibility and mobility are super important, right? That's what the transit service is all about. And when I think we have a couple of ideas about making sure that the bus service is more accessible. So one of the things that we talked about was the bus bulbs, and that idea that we bring the curb out to the bus and how much more accessible that can make the bus service. So if there's a lot of stops and you have to walk into the street to get onto the bus, that service, even though it's close to your house, might not be that accessible. Where if you have to travel a little bit further, but you get to a bus stop where there's a bulb and the curb comes right out to meet the bus, and you basically take one small step to get onto the bus, that could be more accessible even if it's a little bit further away. And in almost every case, we're not talking about asking people to walk long distances, we're just asking them to walk a little bit longer. So one of the things that we have been thinking about is like the aisle of a grocery store, and not like a Costco or a giant grocery store, but sort of just a small grocery store that's, several feet, tens of feet longer. And this idea that we can make service a lot faster and a lot more reliable if people are willing to walk a little bit further. So that's one thing. I also want to make sure that we're not talking about pulling out bus stops all over the system, and that there, like I mentioned, there's some corridors where SEPTA is carrying 20,000 riders a day. These are corridors where we really want to improve the speed. We really want to make sure that the buses are reliable. And so in those cases, we might be focused on reducing stops. In other cases where the service is still really important, we still want it to be reliable, but we know that accessibility and mobility are also very, very important. And so in those cases, we might make a different trade-off in terms of how we space or balance the bus stops.
And also, just to add one note, I think sort of pedestrian accommodations, things like that, ultimately are going to play a part in this. Not the entire region has sort of diverse, geographies. The city obviously is very dense with a good sidewalk network. Some of our suburban communities are almost rural in nature, but we still serve them. So when we get into implementation, when we get into actually making a decision about how we want to reapportion bus stops, we're going to be taking all of these things into consideration, including populations of where there are many elderly people or populations where there are persons with disabilities. So these are all going to be considerations as we move through this process, and we'll be very open and upfront about those types of things along the way.
Great. This is about boarding the buses to impact speed and reliability. Why isn't all-door or off-board boarding being offered as a solution? Is this limited by the status of the SEPTA key?
I could take this one, Bethany. So I think this is something that we've definitely thought about and talked about before. I think there are some limits to SEPTA key, so that's part of it. But also part of it is that not all environments are really conducive to all-door boarding, and certainly not all environments are conducive to off-board fare payment. We'd have to be able to install devices and things like that, it's not just a SEPTA key issue, it's a right-of-way issue and things like that. So I think that we would be very interested in looking at this further. And we've looked at it a little bit on some of our routes, but that is not going to be a primary consideration for this project. And just to be fair, pre-COVID, we have done all-door boarding at some of our busiest stops. I'm thinking about the Municipal Services Building and 52nd and Market, where we essentially have spotters, having people, checking people's passes and pointing them to the right buses. So we've tried sort of ad hoc versions of this, but we're not ready to adopt it as a policy yet. But it's something that I believe we should look at, and I think we'll be looking at in the future.
I have a related question. Do you envision that the plan that you come up with will have some pilot features? There may be some pilots you want to do rather than waiting until you have the entire thing worked out. So do you envision doing any pilots? And it seems to me some of the recommendations or things that you're looking at would be ideal to do some pilot projects.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, no, I think that we are very excited about doing some projects, pilot projects or otherwise. I think all-door boarding actually would make a pretty cool pilot. I think we're working with the city on the bus lanes on the short segments of JFK and Market. This is a pilot of sorts. We're definitely going to be doing a lot of testing and evaluation on those. So I think pilots are a great idea, and I think especially as we get out of this first phase of the project, which is really focused on existing conditions, and we start building the case for making changes, I think that's when we'd like to unveil some pilots. But I think pilots are a great idea, and I've worked on a bunch of them in the past, and I think even if that you don't ultimately get what you want out of it, they're really good learning experiences.
All right. Is it feasible to increase frequency in suburban areas where buses run hourly?
Yeah, I think it is feasible. I think increasing service frequency, of course, in the suburban areas, one of the big trade-offs will be how much, how much service you're going to try to serve. So what is the geographic area that you're trying to cover? And if you reduce that, then you can serve a smaller area more frequently, because it is true. And I don't know if we said this or not, but the bus revolution is a cost neutral plan. So we have the same amount of money, and what we're trying to do is change the bus services, tweak the bus routes, or make changes in ways that we're going to end up using the same number of buses, the same number of drivers, and having the same number of hours of service. So when we look at the suburban areas, there's some bus routes that are really long. Some of the things that we've been talking about is shortening them, not going into destinations or not serving areas where the ridership is really low. We have a lot of ideas on the table. Nothing's been determined, but the idea would be to take areas that have a lot of riders and increase the service frequency in those areas, and then stop serving areas where ridership is really low.
It's definitely not feasible to add frequency everywhere.
Right, that's true.
That's not feasible. Bethany said this is a cost neutral plan. We definitely see parts of our region in the city and suburbs which really do sort of befit more frequency, but not that's not going to work everywhere. So but we'll be again. We're just at the beginning stages of sort of actually talking about these things, and we'll be coming to you as well as our partners with a lot more work in the future, and sort of talking these types of things through very publicly.
Couple questions about bus only lanes.
Mhm.
So one is, are there any plans to create route only for buses to make sure buses are on time? So I guess just the entire street is just bus. Is that on the table?
I would say it's on the table. We had, at this point, no idea is off the table, at least not from our perspective. I think there are some streets in some cities around the United States where it's like a busway that's only used by bus. I think Pittsburgh actually has a couple of really famous busways. Um, I, so yeah, I think it's something we can consider. We haven't talked specifically about doing something like that or even identified where that might be. If we were going to take a street away in the city of Philadelphia, away from general purpose travel and dedicate it to the bus, that might be a big lift, but I do think it's something that we can consider and talk about.
And we worked very closely with the city of Philadelphia on its transit plan. We were very supportive of the recommendations there, and our work builds off of that work. And like Bethany said, we're not taking anything off the table right now. We want to build off of all the good work that's already been done and add to it.
We have about 7 more minutes. So Henry, if we could take just a couple of questions, and then I think there's a brief wrap up with Bethany, and then Dan. So do you have a couple of questions they can answer efficiently?
Yeah, sure.
Easy
Another
ones,
one
that means.
about bus only lanes. When private cars use the bus only lanes, are there ways to enforce that, or how do you define bus only lanes and make sure that they're only for the bus?
Right. So there's a lot of different ways you can do that. I think the city of Philadelphia has put some stenciling down or some painting. That's a really common way. Sometimes bus only lanes are bus only for certain times of the day. Often that's peak periods, sort of like 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. or 3 p.m. to 5 p.m., 6 p.m., something like that. Or you can make them bus lanes all the time. Sometimes they're separated with either some like a curb so that cars can't get into them. The other thing is that enforcement is really important. And if you enforce the bus lanes, then people will start to respect that. If you don't enforce them, then you'll find cars that park in the lanes. And that's been the experience nationally.
Yeah, and I think that enforcement can be, cameras on posts. I think cameras on buses. It won't not we. I think we all know we're all grown ups. We all know that these lanes will not be effective without proper enforcement, and that enforcement has to be sustained. It can't be a 2-week blitz at the start of the project and then die out. People will eventually figure out that no one's ticketing and then start driving in the lane again. So I think that that sort of speaks to the need of having longer dedicated facilities. That it's nice to have a few blocks here and there, but the longer the facilities are, the easier it will be to enforce them, because people will see it. It will be reinforced every block, and they'll get used to it being just a part of the city's infrastructure, or the whatever part of the region it is.
Okay, one more, Henry.
One more. Okay, that's a tall task.
Tough call.
Let's see. Will bus stop shelter amenities such as lighting, shelters, heat lamps be included in this project?
So go ahead, Dan.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, so not specifically, right? Like I think But at the same time, we know that if we're asking people to transfer, that they need to have a facility that's safe and comfortable for them to transfer in. If we want to build those bus bulbs that I talked about earlier, those also come with some transit facilities. So I think as we make recommendations for improvement to the corridors or to the infrastructure overall, that will include bus stops. But generally speaking, what we're focused on is where the buses go, how they operate, when they operate, and where they operate.
Dan, did you have a comment?
No, I think that covered it.
No.
Okay,
And I
so
will say that I was just going to say we will compile all those questions and we can answer some of them. I think we're due to update an FAQ for the website. And so we can use some of those questions to do that.
okay, so Bethany, you want to do your wrap up, and then we'll toss it to Dan.
Okay, great. So can we have the slides back up? I just wanted to thank everybody for being here. We really appreciate your taking some time out of your evening and spending it with us, listening to us to talk about different solutions for how we might make SEPTA's bus service better. I also want to invite you to go to the website, septabusrevolution.com. You can also send us an email at busnetwork. Well, the email is busnetwork@septa.org. And feel free, if your question didn't get answered, to go ahead and send that to us. And then Dan, I'm going to let you talk about some of the upcoming events.
Yeah, so we have a series of pop-up events scheduled at some transit centers and bus stops throughout the region. We actually have our first one after a slight delay. We have our first one at Frankfurt Transportation Center tomorrow from 3 to 6 p.m., but we'll be doing more throughout September and October. I would love to see you there. I'll be at many of them. I believe Henry will too. And we'll have a bunch of other SEPTA staff there to sort of talk about actually an exercise similar to the one you went through today, but also to talk more about the project generally if people are so inclined. So again, we're going to have a second transit talk at the end of September on the 30th. So if it'll be similar to this one, but a bit different. So if you want to hear more then, or you have a question that didn't get answered, we'd invite you to register for that one too. And please, spread the word. We want as many people to come to these as possible. And again, this is the first phase of the project. There'll be other phases with additional outreach where you'll see other project materials and things of the sort. Bethany already thanked everyone, but from SEPTA, I would like to thank you all for joining us and taking such a strong interest in our work. I'd invite you to look at our project site, septabusrevolution.com, as well as planning.septa.org for information on some of those other projects. Keep checking back for more information. Have a great night, and we hope to see you at the pop-ups or online again in the near future.
Swag.
There'll be some swag. There'll be some swag at the events, and you'll get to talk to a real live SEPTA person. But have a great night, and we hope to see you all again sometime soon.
Thank you.